sir. Well, my work as a school psychologist is to be the gatekeeper for special education. Any child in special ed in America was evaluated by a school psychologist. If you don't come through us, you don't go to special ed, which is why most people never heard of the school psychologist.
Now explain what special ed is to people that don't know.
Special education is a federal law. It is a program that was created in 1975 to give children with disabilities a right to learn in public school. Before 75, if you were blind, deaf, autistic, mentally retarded, they would simply tell your parents, we have no program for you, keep them home, or find a private school.
Gotcha.
The federal government said, well, that's a violation of constitutional right, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. These children have disabilities. We cannot discriminate against them because they have disabilities, and thus special ed was created. However, it became a problem. Why? Because in predominantly African-American and Latino neighborhoods, special ed became a trash can, and is still used as a trash can, where Black and Latino boys are sent that the teachers don't want to be bothered with. The two biggest labels, and everybody knows about them. ADHD.
And ADHD.
It was ADD in 1980. It became ADHD in 1987. And the question is why? Why did they add hyper?
Some of that stuff I think is bullcrap, man. When they say kids have ADD or ADHD,
It is.
I think it's bullcrap.
It is.
Like the kids are just energetic.
But some of these kids that they say, I think they put them on prescription, they put them on pills, they put them on these special classes, and they send them to psychologists, and then it's on their record. And then when it's on their record, they can't get certain jobs later on in life. So I think it's effed up.
I agree with what you said, too.
I have 4 kids.
I was diagnosed
You're
with
correct.
that back in the day, but my father would never let them put me on no medication and nothing. He was like, this boy just don't know how to act.
Good for him.
That's all.
Good for him
You
because
know?
the side effects.
Yes.
The side effects are no joke. I mean, it can affect your ability to have children. It can cause diabetes, tic disorders, psychosis. But here's the thing. Parents are uneducated. The one thing that your listeners got to know, especially the parents, is the labels that we apply are not scientifically validated when we give them out. In other words, if I evaluate your child, I give them an IQ test, right? I give them a bunch of achievement tests. I might give them some emotional measures. But when I say he has ADHD, the test did not give me that diagnosis. It is a professional opinion that I make based on my training, my expertise, my background. It can be wrong. Right. And when 97% of all school psychologists are something other than African-American, the diagnosis is likely to be wrong. And given the fact that 97% of America's teachers are middle-class white female, okay, you have to look at the cultural biasness in the diagnosis. Who's referring these boys for ADHD? Who's referring them for the Ritalin, the Concerta, the Meditate? It's female teachers. And I don't think a lot of them mean any intentional harm, but schools are run by females. Right. And when a boy cannot conduct himself like a female, he's marginalized and castigated.
Hold on. Okay, so you're saying that women who are in control at these schools, when they see a man not acting feminine, they think something's wrong with him?
When he doesn't exude traditional feminine behavior, such as being able to control himself, sit for long periods of time, something girls can do a little bit more than boys because boys have testosterone. Females have estrogen. Okay. So when he's pre-puberty, he can't sit still for 7 hours. And the reason why schools are still asking our children to sit still for so long is because schools were started by the churches. The first schools in America were started by the churches. And in church, what do? You sit and you listen to the pastor. Well, guess what? Even though the research in cognitive science clearly shows that children learn better when they're up and moving.
Right.
So why is public school, private school, charter school, parochial school still stuck in a church model of instruction? It's convenient for the teachers.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's bullcrap. And when my son was 5, my son's 11 now, he was very energetic and always getting in trouble. And, you know, we live in a white neighborhood, and they told me that I had to get my son checked out. They said he could possibly have ADHD or ADD because he was so energetic, so hyper. And at first I listened. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to take him. And I did my homework. I spoke to my pops, and my pops was like, nah, you were energetic too. You know what I happened to do? You know what I did? I beat it out of you.
Damn right.
You got in trouble? I beat your ass.
That's what my father said. You just don't know how to act.
He said, you don't know how to act. You're a young kid. You like to test men, just like any other kid. You want to test your manhood. And I had a conversation with my son, and I hate to say, he got in trouble. I mean, I didn't put him in the corner and made him sit on timeout. I busted his ass.
But you didn't put him on medication.
No, I did not put him on medication. I did not take him to a psychologist. And now this 11-year-old kid is the best student, best athlete with the best grades, no problem, the politest kid. And I'm so glad I didn't do what a lot of other parents do, put their kid on medicine, take their kids to psychologists, take the kids to things that you can't get off your record.
I had to go see a psychologist. They used to be asking me, do I hear voices?
Well, that's psychotic disorder. That's serious stuff there.
Yeah,
Most people don't have
But I
that.
didn't hear voices. I was just a bad kid in school. That's
Right.
all. I was the class clown.
And what would you do in there? You'd be like, yeah, I hear voices.
Yeah, I be
You joking
messing with
around.
them like, yeah, I hear voices all the time. I hear one right now, and it just asked me, do I hear voices? Stupid stuff like
But
that.
see, the one thing Envy said, envy your father, your children live with you.
Right.
That's the medicine for ADHD. I refer to ADHD as ain't no daddy at home disorder.
Okay.
ADHD.
daddy at home
85%
disorder.
of black and Latino boys who are diagnosed with ADHD don't have a male presence in their life. Envy's home. So here's the thing. Mothers traditionally, by socialization, provide the nurture and the love. Fathers traditionally, by socialization, provide the structure and the discipline.
Wait till your father gets home. That's what I
Exactly.
used to
Now,
say.
when do we get ADD? 1980. ADHD 1987. Is that a coincidence that that's the same decade that America started mass incarcerating black and Latino male fathers? Of course not. They started locking up the fathers for selling crack, and then they will give their sons crack but call it Ritalin or Metadate or Concerta so they can sit still long enough to be miseducated. Here's the thing. The same drugs that are sending men to jail for 5, 10, 15 years, that's exactly the same drug they're giving their son. The Drug Enforcement Agency classifies Ritalin as a Schedule II drug. It's in the same category as cocaine and opium. It's no different than the illegal drugs. So how do you lock up millions of black and Latino males for selling dope, and then you give their sons dope so they can get a miseducation?
Now you said something earlier that I had a question about. You're a psychologist. You're a doctor. Now, when I was a kid and there was a kid that was slow, we called him retarded. You said a kid was retarded earlier.
That's a diagnosis.
Right, but people
Oh,
are,
the retarded is the actual diagnosis.
Yes, what
people are mad
President
when you
Obama
say
just
retarded,
changed
but I
it.
don't even know what do you call somebody? You say Down syndrome?
No, mental retardation was the label until 2009. President Obama changed it to intellectual disability because parents of mentally retarded children felt the label was too stigmatizing. And there's a whole history to MR. Before they was called retarded, they was called imbeciles. Before they was called imbecile, they was called idiots. These were the official words. So when we call people idiots now, just in gesture, that used to be a psychological diagnosis. So it went from idiot to imbecile to mentally retarded. Now it's intellectual deficiency.
So the
Well, I'm a
proper,
brilliant
proper
idiot.
term is
Intellectual disability now.
intellectual disability.
So you
Okay.
can't say retarded at all.
Nah,
You know what made me
So what
stop
is, like,
saying that when I was
A-Town
when
and
I,
I don't know.
when I
I'm
was
asking. I want to know the proper term to be able to call them. I don't know.
I don't know.
God,
I mean
too
now,
far.
but here's the thing. Now because MR is no longer legal,
Yeah.
you can use it in social conversation. So if you wanted to make a joke with me and say you retarded, it's acceptable now because it's no longer technical
ain't
joke.
acceptable.
it isn't because I actually used to babysit my friend's little sister who at the time she was mentally retarded is what they called it. I stopped using that word because she would get so offended because her little sister was at that time mentally retarded. So I stopped using that word period because you don't realize how offensive it is until you're around somebody who actually has to deal with that in
That
their life.
stigma.
She would get really upset.
But one thing you need to know about MR, if you're a black or Latino boy growing up in America, you're 4 times as likely to be diagnosed as mentally retarded than a white child. Because number one, the IQ tests that we use are culturally biased. Okay, the school psychologist, our main weapon is the IQ test. That's what we do, and it's culturally biased. And a lot of black and Latino boys get diagnosed as retarded or intellectually disabled when they are not because their working vocabulary levels is low. And one of the messages I want to give to your parent listeners is turn off the video games, turn off the cell phones, turn off the TV. Time that we used to spend reading is now spent on electronic gadgets, which is taking our children away from literacy. So when your son sits down to take the standardized test, he scores 20 points lower, not because he couldn't answer the question correctly. He didn't understand the words that were used to present the question. And that's where the discrepancy is, the language that the black and Latino kids haven't mastered because they're not reading. They don't go to the public library.
And we have
Everything is
auto
internet.
type, and we have
Listen, he's absolutely right because I took a standardized test once, like in high school, and for a semester they had me in like all the retarded classes. Like they had me in the read. I think it was the reading
Remedial?
and math.
Right.
Remedial, yeah. And I'm in there
Yeah.
with the slow kids. I'm like, yo, what the hell is going
But
on?
was it
Like,
remedial math or was it learning support? See, learning support is special ed. If you're learning disabled, you get learning support. If you was remedial, that's the step before they put you in special ed. Normally remedial, let's give him something to see if he can catch back up.
It was remedial.
Okay, then it
It was
wasn't
remedial.
special ed.
But it was a
then.
couple of the special ed kids in there. A couple of the slow kids was in
Okay,
there.
you could have had that, but you
Slow
wasn't
kids.
technically special ed unless you was diagnosed and given an IEP, which is your own curriculum to learn because it's believed you can't keep up. And just for the record, most kids I refer for special ed for reading. It's reading.
Right.
Special ed is 85% reading.
And education bothers me as well because you have these kids that, like you said, might not be interested in reading, might not be interested in history, and they put these kids in remedial classes, but then if you put them in a class of math, they're advanced. You know, it doesn't show that a kid is slow. It shows that a kid might not be interested. And I kind of think they have to change how they teach kids.
Yes.
And, you know, it's some of the stuff that I really feel that they teach these kids is bullshit.
Well,
You know, I mean,
half
I
of
don't
school
think it
is
prepares
filler.
them for life.
Half
Well,
of
you know
school
what? I
is
will
filler.
say this because I did go to school for education. At one point, I was going to be a teacher, and I did a whole semester of at the Bank Street College of Education, and I was actually like teaching in classes. And first of all, a lot of teachers don't get paid that well, so it is difficult because that's a job that you have to be really dedicated and love to be
Yes.
great at it because it's not like the salary is so great, and it is a
Nah.
difficult, job to have. And the other thing is, yeah, it is right. It is the teachers. Like I remember one of the teachers that taught science and math, she ended up crying in the classroom one day because the kids were just out of control and she didn't know how to handle it. She just was overwhelmed. She didn't know what to do to deal with these
Was it a
kids.
mentally retarded class or was it?
No, it was regular 6th and 7th graders. And she had, shut up, Charlemagne. And she had no idea what to do. But I did take, like, there was a couple kids in the class that I felt like they just needed special attention. And it's hard when you
Right.
have 45 students in one class and one teacher for them to really give individual students attention to make sure they make it to the next year, make sure they want to come to school.
And a lot of that has to do with the principal. Now, I'm a principal as well, okay?
Okay.
When you're given a budget, you have to decide how you're going to ration out that money. And a lot of classes that have more challenging students in them academically or behaviorally, they should have a classroom assistant. They should have an aide.
Right.
But let me tell you what a lot of principals do. Instead of giving the teachers aides to make their job easier, they take that money and they redirect it to the football team. They redirect it to the basketball team.
You meant
And so
aide.
athletics are one like you come in as an aide to help that teacher who's struggling, keep the boys in line, that type of a thing, like an enforcer, if you would. But the principals are like, I'm not doing that because my basketball team is what's popping in this high school.
Right.
My football team is what's popping. And I'll tell you something else. A lot of principals are taking the special ed money and using it for athletics. See, special ed comes with money. And we need to be clear about this. They're not putting your kid in there because they really want to help. They put your kid in there. In New York, by the way, you guys have the highest special ed payout. I think for a special ed kid in New York, you get like $15,000 extra. So this is a business.
Wow.
Special ed is a racket. And this is what I try to get parents to understand. That's why when your kids go in, they don't like to bring them out because I'm getting $15,000 on top of the regular money. So the special kids are worth twice as much. In New York, 3 times as much as the regular kids.
Is that why they hold them in school longer? Because I don't know if this is true. They always say they keep them in school till they're 21 in high school.
Okay, special ed law says a child can be special educated until they graduate or age 21. So you're in 12th grade, right? It's time for you to graduate.
Yeah.
Your mom found out you can't read. But you a special ed student, so you got more rights than the regular children. Because you can't read and the school had an obligation to teach you because you were special, you can stay in school until 21. Now, of course, your mom is going to say, my son ain't going to show back up to school after all his friends have graduated. That's okay. The school is going to take that extra special ed money, hire a tutor, and that tutor is going to come to your home and tutor you until you're up to where you need
And
to
the
be.
school still gets the 15 grand.
The school still get the money. But the
Jesus
problem is
Christ.
too many parents will let their kids graduate knowing they not ready.
that
So
part
you
of the
just
no-
setting them up for jail.
Is that part of the No Child Left Behind thing?
Well, No Child Left Behind mandated that special ed kids take the same test that the regular kids take. So it did change the game a little bit because now instead of just throwing the special ed kids away, we want to see how they're doing.
Gotcha.
But even with No Child Left Behind, you can still tuck the special ed kids under special umbrella so it really doesn't affect your ability to qualify.
Now, let me ask you a question with special ed kids. I feel like nowadays special ed kids are kind of put on their own island. And
Yes.
the reason I say that is,
World Star?
nah, not the World Star Island. When I was a kid, we had a kid that lived up the block. We called him the E kid because he was, what's the word I can use that's proper?
Intellectual, what is it?
Intellectual disability.
Intellectual disability, ID.
Right. All he said was E, right?
Well, he could have been
Not funny,
autistic.
that's
He
not
could have been
funny.
autistic.
Right. But it's not funny. But his parents allowed him to play with us.
Okay.
And we knew he was a special ed kid. But we still played with him, and we knew what his ability was, but it made it easier for his moms.
Ain't they strong?
Very strong.
Yes, sir.
But none of these kids I see now, I don't see any special ed kids out there.
Me neither.
I don't
I
see
was
them.
just thinking that
You don't see them anymore.
And then,
Well-
but you know what I be thinking sometimes? Like, you know how you be on social media and people be saying crazy stuff? Y'all be like, these are the slow kids that grew up. That's how I really be thinking.
But see,
in my
if you
mind.
don't see the special ed kids, that's illegal. Okay, the law, special ed law, is two major planks to it. One says if you got a disability, you have a right to a free and appropriate public education. If you slow, your parents ain't got to pay for you to be educated, and you better be learning. The other part of the law says you must be taught in the least restrictive environment. That means that if Charlemagne has a reading disability, Charlemagne should only be in special ed for what class?
Reading.
And if you got a math disability, you should only be in special ed for what class?
Math.
But you find that special ed kids are in special ed all day, which is illegal because special ed is legal segregation. Before 1954, if you were black, they said, listen, you couldn't come to school. Not this school. This is an all-white school. Okay, but then the Supreme Court said you can't use color no more after 54. So 20 years later in 74, when they were coming up with the special ed law, they said, hey, if we want to segregate the black and Latino kids, we're not going to say that they're black and Latino, and that's why they can't come. We're going to say they're learning disabled, ADHD. So they use these labels to keep children of color out of predominantly white schools.
And that's crazy, though, because, it was segregated because their trailers used to be in the back of the school. They used to eat lunch before all of us. They used to ride the short bus.
And then there was a big lawsuit where the special ed parents came together and said, listen, our kids are being excluded from the regular class. Now, here's the question people would ask. If they special, why do you want them around the regular kids if they can't keep up? There's a psychological reason for that. If your child is autistic, I still want him in a regular class as much as he can handle it. You know why?
Absolutely.
Because he gets to see what a normal child is able to do.
It's like a Montessori school where the older kids kind of teach the younger kids, maybe the kids that don't have.
To an extent. To an extent. I got a little bit of an issue with Montessori, though, because it's ungraded.
Wait. All right. Well, I was going to say that, too, because,
I don't agree with that.
Where an ID child, even children teach kids better than adults can.
Yes.
My daughter was talking at the age of 1.5, and not because I was reading to her, because she was around her sisters and brothers. So I think that even when I was growing up, we had ID kids all around us.
Bingo.
But now I don't see them in our classes anymore, and if I do, it's very far and very few.
Exactly.
Now, what's your problem with Montessori schools?
They're ungraded. Here's the problem, and I do a lot of evaluation for Montessori students, right? Here's the issue. If you got a black kid going to a Montessori school from kindergarten to 5th grade, and then a parent decides to put them back in public or private school at 6th grade, you were in an ungraded environment for 6 years. I don't know what your reading level is. I don't know what your math level is. And then I stick you back into a graded environment, and then I find out you 3 levels behind. Part of the Montessori philosophy is that children go at their own pace.
Right.
Well, guess what? If you're coming from the hood, you don't benefit from white privilege. You can't afford to be going at your own pace. Now, Sally in the suburbs, who daddy owned 5 corporations, she could be dumb as a doorknob. She's still going to run that corporation when he retire. But if you're black or Latino, you don't have a silver spoon. So how can your parents afford to put you in an environment that's ungraded where you're not sure you're making the gains necessary so when you get put back into grade school or ultimately go to college, you are where you need to be? It's too big of a risk. And I've evaluated too many Montessori students who were far behind where they should have been.
But Montessori is so expensive, you're not going to get 9 times out of 10 of them hood kids in them school because they can't afford them. The Montessori schools are expensive.
Well, that's the point. Who goes to Montessori? The rich kids.
Privileged kids, yeah.
And it's okay for them not to learn because you're running daddy's business regardless.
Right. Yeah, you're gonna
I do a lot of testing in these private schools, and I'm going to tell y'all something. Them private schools, they're not doing as good of a job y'all think. Okay, these white private schools, $20,000 a year. I'm testing these kids.
Oh, I don't believe in those private schools. I think it's the child and what they want to learn.
Well,
I went to St. Francis Prep. I went to Hampton University, and I barely got out. Not because of anything else, but I really didn't care about school.
Envy might have been diagnosed with a little mental retardation back.
I will say this though. I went to private school. I went to Poly Prep in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And our classes were so small that I felt like I did get a lot of extra attention. We might have had 12 students in one class.
Yeah.
And to me, that was great. And I also had a nice variety of things I could choose from. We were encouraged to play sports, like do a lot of different things. And when I went to public school and I had 30 kids in my class, it wasn't the same.
Exactly. But why? Okay, what you just articulated was that your private school experience was better because the classes were smaller.
That's why.
Not that the instruction was any better than what they were necessarily doing in the neighborhood school. But in the neighborhood school, you got 35 kids.
Exactly.
Whereas in the private schools, you got 10 to 15. So it's not the quality of instruction. It's the environmental conditions that allow for the teacher to do what they're supposed to do, which is teach, instead of being a behavioral warrant officer.